All right, good evening. We are so excited to have you here for our college panel. We have several fantastic admission officers who are going to talk to you about all different facets of the college admissions process. We have Rayanne DiBaggio from Case Western University, Daniel Schnall from Washington University, Andrew Boehm from Miami, and Jesse Yeager from Denison. There will be an opportunity to ask questions through the Q&A. So Rayanne is going to kick us off.
Thanks, Cincy. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're having a great evening. Thank you very much for having us. And we've got a lot of great information to share with you. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm starting the evening talking a little bit about admission. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about selective admission and then the holistic review. So what happens once you apply? So hopefully you're working on those lists and you're starting to think about some schools. And when you get that shorter list together, you're then going to be planning to submit those applications. And so what does that kind of look like? So selective college admission means that students are applying to schools, and oftentimes there are more applicants for spaces that are available. I think the majority of schools kind of fall in what we call that more selective category. That's the largest number of schools. It's more selective than open enrollment, but it can be almost open enrollment to almost highly selective, and there's a wide range in between there. So as you're working with schools and getting more information about the admission, kind of the admission process there, you'll have a better sense of applicants and how many they're admitting as part of that. But as part of that admission, they're also looking at a variety of factors, and we're going to talk a little bit about what those factors look like. And then there's a much smaller number that would be under the category heading of very selective. And I think as we hear about admission, college admission, those are typically the handful of schools that we hear the most about: record number of applicants, fewest number that we've admitted in the process. So I think that's what causes a lot of people to get a little nervous about this process. But at the end of the day, you're going to have some really good options as you go through this process, and some great choices that you will be making. So what does selective college admission mean? What are we looking to do? So we're trying to identify students who we think will be successful academically on our campuses. We are also trying to attract students who are going to contribute to our campus life communities. We are also looking to build a very talented and diverse class on our campuses, and that's defined a little differently by each institution. And then we also are looking to fill specific university programs and needs, and that's information that you really don't have any insight on, because every school is going to be a little bit different as to what they want their class and their composite and their community to look like. So as you start this process, what does selective college admission mean? What does selective admission, what are we looking for? So, there are different kinds of decisions, application cycles that you may choose to apply under. So as you're going through this process, if there's a school that continually rises to the top as your number one choice school, and you're in a position to apply as an early decision candidate, which is a binding commitment that you're making with the institution, that might be the best route for you, because you know that if you get admitted, you're ready to make that commitment. Everything has lined up as part of that decision process. Many institutions know that students want to apply early in the fall, but they don't want that binding piece. They're not ready to make that part of the commitment. So there's early action, which allows students to apply early November, mid-November, typically here by the end of the year, beginning of January. So then the commitment is that May 1st. So it gives you time to look at everything, weigh all of your options, make that decision as all of your, the pieces of your search process are starting to fall into place. There are some students that want a little bit more time. Maybe they're taking their most challenging courses, or they've had kind of an up and down academic performance. And so, you want a little bit more time. So maybe you're applying under a later cycle, regular decision. So that typically has a deadline of mid-January, end of January, early February. The trade-off of that is you get your admission decision a little bit later in the cycle. So you have a shorter window of time before you can make that final commitment to the university. And then you're going to find there are other schools that have kind of rolling admissions. So after your application becomes complete, there's a certain amount of time, and they just continue to roll those admission decisions out. So as you're looking at your list of schools, it's going to be important for you to see what the different application cycles are and which one might fit best for you. You're also going to find that there are about 1,000 colleges and universities that accept the common application, which is one application form. Many schools have agreed to take that, but then we want some information that is unique to our institution. So there might be an additional page with questions or perhaps short answer questions that you might need to answer. And then there's also the coalition application with SCORE, which is another more common type of application. But there are over 3,000 colleges and universities. And so you're going to find that there are a lot of schools that also have their own institutional application. So many of you will be filling out more than one application in this process. And the important thing is to remember that final grades do matter. So we're going to be paying close attention to what you look like academically when you apply, and then where you're sitting in the middle of your senior year, and then finally what your grades look like when you get to the end of your senior year. So what is holistic review? Well, what that means is that we are individually looking at applications. So we are paying close attention to all the pieces and parts that make up an application. So I like to think of the application process as a puzzle, and each piece of the application is like a puzzle. So you're kind of scattering all those pieces, and then your admission counselor, as we're reviewing, we're taking each of those, we're learning something about you on each of those individual pieces, and then we're fitting them together. So by the end of the review process, we've drawn a picture. There's a picture of you that's emerging as an applicant to our institutions, and then that's helping us decide how you'll fit into the living and learning community. So we are looking at your academics, the courses that you have available to you at Wyoming, the choices that you have made in terms of the rigor, the strength of the curriculum, your preparation, the grades you're earning as part of that. So trying to get a sense of your academic preparation for the programs that you might be interested in, and then are you prepared to be an active contributor in our classrooms on our campuses? We're going to talk a little bit about testing, so I'm not going to spend any time on that other than to say that some schools may ask for testing, some schools may not ask for testing, so knowing a little bit about that requirement. If you do have that, it's one more piece to learn a little bit more about you. If you don't, that's okay too. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up shortly. It's also important in the holistic review for us to get a sense of what students do outside of the classroom. So we want to make sure that you're prepared academically to be successful, but then we're looking for students who are going to be engaged learners on our campuses. So whether you continue to do things that you've been involved in high school, or you find new and different things in this next part of your academic journey, we're looking for students who have developed those good time management skills, who are well-rounded. It doesn't necessarily mean how many things you do, but the things that you are most passionate about, and where are you spending your time, and how are you engaged in those things that are important to you. Your essay is also an important piece of that holistic review. It helps us learn a little bit more about you, so gives us some additional insight into who you are, shares more about your story with us. And then, of course, those recommendation letters. And those are very important because they come from your counselor, they come from your teachers. So helps us get a sense of what you look like in your school community. Are you an engaged learner? Are you somebody who's active in the classroom? Do you ask questions? Can you work well independently? Do you work well in a collaborative environment? And that helps us get a sense of, what you're looking like in our overall applicant pool, and if you would be a good fit for our campus communities. I think it's also important to know that it is not a one and done review, which means that one person looks at your application. Your application is typically reviewed by multiple people throughout the admission process. And we do that intentionally because we are human too. And so we want to be able to, kind of put all of our thoughts together. Sometimes there's, a couple of reads and a decision is recommended. Sometimes there's that infamous admission committee that comes into play where there's some discussion that happens. But I think the important thing is to know that we recognize that you are putting a great deal of time into preparing your application, sharing your story with us, helping us learn a little bit more about you. So it's important for you to know that we are also taking the time to pay close attention to the information that, you've put together so that we can really get a sense of, who you are. It's your opportunity to put your voice to your story, introduce yourself to us, and then help us get a sense of how you'll fit into our campus communities. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Rayanne. So if you joined us before we got started, the format of the program is we've got 4 speakers. You just heard from Rayanne DiBaggio from Case Western, who spoke about holistic review process. And then we have a representative from Washington University who's going to talk about test optional, a representative from Denison who's going to talk about scholarship and financial aid, and Andrew from Miami who's going to talk about kind of the college search in general. The question and answer box is live, if you will. So if you have questions or want further clarification, please go ahead and type in that question and we will answer it. Daniel is going to talk to us about test optional.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Schnall. I am your admissions officer for Washington University in St. Louis. And just to first provide you a quick snapshot of WashU, we're a mid-sized private research university here in St. Louis. St. Louis, big city, but a small town feel, and the people are really friendly and collaborative. Great city. I encourage you to check it out. But academically, WashU has 5 undergraduate divisions. Arts and sciences is our biggest one, but we also have a division for engineering, another one for business, art, and architecture. A couple things that make us unique: when you submit your application, you'll have to actually apply to one of those schools. But you can take classes in any of them. So interdisciplinary study is really our hallmark, and our students study everything. They're free to pursue majors or minors across different divisions. I like to say try all the ice cream flavors. And around 80% of our students will graduate with more than one major because of that flexibility that we offer. Lots of small discussion-based classes, lots of personalized advising, so our faculty and our advisors can really get to know our students well and just support them during their college journey. Now, we're an example of a highly selective school. We just receive far more applications than we have space in our class. So to put some numbers to that, there are about 1,800 seats in our first year class. This year, we received over 32,000 applications for those 1,800 seats. So we really rely on holistic review and a lot of the things that you just heard about because we have to. We simply just don't have space to admit all the highly successful and talented students who've demonstrated that they could be successful at WashU. So we seek to understand each student by name and by story, which is our unofficial motto. We want to build our class student by student rather than just using numbers, because you're so much more than just numbers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about test optional here. As a step back, like Rayanne just discussed, holistic review is this comprehensive consideration of a student's academic preparation, their personal attributes, their life experiences, all kinds of the ways that they would contribute to a college community. And there are several things that colleges use to consider academic preparedness. That includes, but isn't limited to, a student's transcript or a school profile, which is a document that just shows more school information about what's available to a student. There are standardized test scores like the SAT and the ACT, and sometimes even letters of recommendation. But I'm going to speak a little bit about the test scores in particular. And I think that it's really important that I first clarify some of the terminology and just what it means. You may have heard some of these phrases being tossed around, or maybe tonight's your first time hearing some of them, but they are test optional, test blind. You may even hear the phrase test free. And it's really important to know what each of these means by the time you're submitting college applications. A school that is test blind is not going to consider test scores, even if you submit them. And test free is just another phrase that means the same thing as test blind. But by comparison, a school that's test optional is actually going to consider those test scores if a student submits them. It's not optional whether or not they will be considered by admissions if you submit them, because they will. if they're provided. The optional part comes down to whether you, the student, chooses to submit them as part of your application materials to that school. Now, test optional and test blind have actually been around for quite some time, but colleges have permanent test optional or test blind policies in place. They were few and far between, but then the world changed in 2020. You may have heard about it. But during the pandemic, not all students could access these tests. So almost every single college became test optional, at least temporarily. And many of them, including us, have extended test optional policies simply so we can continue to evaluate the students that we are enrolling that don't have test scores and make sure that they're being successful before we make a more permanent decision. So like I said, WashU is one of these schools. We launched a test optional pilot for the fall of 2021 students that's now been extended for 3 more years. So we're test optional right now, at least, until our current high school juniors who are applying for admission to college in fall 2024. While we certainly hope to extend this policy, we just don't know yet. So if you're a sophomore or a freshman on this right now, you'll just have to sit tight for now, and we'll keep you posted as soon as we know more information. So the million-dollar question here is, amidst all of these different testing policies, should you take the test? And if you do, should you submit your test scores or not? And the obvious answer here is it depends. But different schools will look at this information differently, and there's no hard and fast rule about it. So I've got a few pieces of advice to share with you on this call, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has after this also. First things first, plan to take the test if you're comfortable doing so. But first, take a practice test, and take 2 practice tests, because you should take them for both ACT and SAT. You don't need to register for the test and pay for official ones. There are free practice tests on their websites. Some students perform better in one than the other. So if you just try them both once for practice, you can figure out if there's a big difference between your starting score percentile. If you're a 9th grader on this call, sit tight. You don't need to worry about any of this right now. If you're at the end of your 10th grade year, this is something to start thinking about over the summer, but there's really no rush. Most students are not going to take their first official standardized test until late in 11th grade for the SAT or the ACT. So those of you who are 11th graders, maybe take a practice test before you do the real thing, but just keep in mind there's always a reason that the professional athletes are warming up before their games. They're not taking the first shot of the day in a game. So make sure that you do practice first. Second, when it comes to admissions, learn about scholarships for schools on your college list too, not just admissions policies. Because some colleges may be test optional for admission, but ultimately require or recommend test scores for you to be considered for scholarships at those schools. Now, WashU is an example of a school that's test optional for both. You're going to get full consideration regardless of whether you have test scores or not. But every school is going to have a different policy here, and it's on you to do the legwork to learn a little bit more about that can help guide you in a decision. Third, do your research to learn about the testing policies for each school on your list once you have made that list. Every single college, like I said, is going to have different policies. They'll have different preferences. They'll have a different testing range. Oftentimes, schools will report the middle 50 percentile, the middle range. And that could be one really important factor in helping you make a decision about whether you want to submit your scores. Is your score within that middle 50 percentile or not? Here at WashU, we don't have any kind of minimum threshold or cutoff score for testing or for GPAs, but we're going to look at both your overall performance and individual section scores when you provide a test score. So if you're applying to our engineering program, you may want to think about submitting your test scores if your math and science scores are a real strength. By comparison, if you're applying to some English literature program or a journalism program, you may want to consider submitting those if you have really strong English or reading scores, just because those are going to be more valuable for a college to consider in evaluating your academic preparation. So all in all, test optional to us means that we're not going to prioritize a student with test scores over a student that didn't provide us test scores. It just means that it's optional for you to submit them, though if you do, we're going to consider them. In the absence of test scores, though, we'll simply consider the information that we do have to determine your academic prep. The transcript, the school report, what classes you've taken, and how you've performed in those classes are still going to be very, very valuable to us in this process. Now, at the end of the day, If you're not sure whether to submit those scores or not, you're also in luck because you've actually got a really wonderful high school counseling office. Your counselors are really awesome. They know what they're doing. I encourage you to reach out to them, especially when you're seniors. Have conversations with them just to get their feedback, and trust that with the way that we're doing things in our holistic review, we are truly considering every single part of the application that you provide to us. What that also means is if we don't see your test scores, there's still going to be a whole lot of other great stuff that we'll be able to see and advocate for you with. So that's all I've got to say about test optional here, though. Like I said, happy to answer any questions a little bit later. I think I'm going to turn things over to Andrew, who's next, talking about navigating the college search.
All right, let's just keep it rolling on. I like this. So, hi everybody, Andrew Boehm. Worked for Miami University for about 10 years. I'm actually a Wyoming resident, so I'm really excited to be joining you all tonight. My kids go to Hilltop. Really hoping that Cincy sticks around for the next 7 or 8 years so that they can obviously benefit from her incredible expertise. And it's also great to obviously just bring all these wonderful people together from these incredible institutions. My job at Miami has been great. I mean, it is, for a lot of you, it's probably really familiar. It's right up the road. It's an incredibly beautiful campus. It has a great national reputation and incredible academics kind of across the board. Mid-sized campus, great ROI. But the campus is what typically always sticks in people's minds. So it makes my job very easy, because running the campus visits and events in a place where you often hear students say, I knew the minute I drove up and I saw all those buildings that was going to be my home away from home. But it doesn't always happen, especially with students from around Cincinnati, because of a lot of misconceptions, thinking people know exactly what it is and that they don't want that. Look, I think that the end goal of the college search process in general is to find a place that makes the student feel best. It's the absolute best fit for them, and fit can take so many different definitions. It can be a financial fit. It can be, an extracurricular, co-curricular fit. It can be completely academic, but whatever is going to drive that student into the place where they say, I'm invested now, this was my choice, I'm going to take advantage of everything that this school has to make sure it's a successful venture. That's when you've had a successful college search process. So how does that happen? Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, there's 1,000 different things I think that could jump out at you on a college visit based off of who you are, your personality, and what you're looking for. My advice going through this with a lot of different families over the past 10 years is pretty hefty. To be honest, what do I got? I got about 8 minutes left. It could be tough to fit that all in, but basically when to start. My belief is it's never too early to start. To be perfectly honest, I started in 8th grade when my brother was a junior in high school. And we went on some college searches, and believe it or not, I ended up falling in love with one of the schools on this call. I went to Denison. I'm a Big Red alum, and it just stuck in my head as an 8th grader. I thought that's what college is to me. And as I got into the college search process, I was determined to make it work and understand how it was going to be the best fit for me. And it was, and I had an amazing experience. I was lucky. I think that going on official college visits at the early ages are not exactly necessary. Freshman, sophomore, junior year, even as you're early in that, a really good time just to get a sense of what type of campuses you're really interested in. So in order to do that, you got to look around and you got to go to different types of schools. We have several great ones that represent a variety of different things on this call that are relatively close. You have rural college towns, you have ones that are in big cities, you have small. There's a variety of different things I think you can look at just from a simple basis, a 20,000-foot view of saying, is this a place I could really see myself living? Is an official visit necessary at that point in time? No, not really. I mean, walking around, getting a sense of what the campus looks like, how it feels like. Do the students look happy there? Is it in the right type of climate that I'm looking for? Maybe you're sick of winters and sick of the snow. Well, start looking in the Southeast, start looking out west. Maybe you love skiing. All right, go look. Denver's, got a bunch of great schools. Colorado's got a bunch of great schools. It's one of my recruitment areas. I find it hard to pull students away from there. But that's the time when you can really start to get a sense of what you're looking for in a grand scheme of things. Then you do your research. Late in your junior year, senior year is when you really start buckling down and digging in deep to these institutions. Luckily for us now, there's a lot of great virtual resources where you don't have to keep going back and going back. But at the same time, there's ways to dig in deeper in a variety of different ways once you get to that really serious aspect of where am I going to apply? Where am I going to potentially go? We talked about it earlier with the application process and holistic review, all those things fitting in. That's when you're narrowing down your list to really start getting the ones you're especially serious about. From a general visit standpoint, they are absolutely important. I see the statistics year in and year out, and I promise you that every school that you would potentially go visit understands how important the campus visit is. We put a lot of effort into it. I know because I'm part of a national organization called the Collegiate Information Visitor Services Association. There are thousands of us that belong to this organization that get in rooms and just talk to each other about how we can make our visits better and how we can make them better for you to really get a sense of if that's going to be a good fit for you or not. It doesn't always feel like that. I'll be perfectly honest. There's a lot of situations where people go to schools and expectations are not met. That's why, a big point of my, advice to people when they go on official college visits is try and keep as open of a mind as absolutely possible. And what I mean by that is not saying go to schools where you don't think you'll be interested in them. I'm saying try to get an understanding of what they're trying to tell you, but don't think that that's an absolute determination of what life is going to be like at that school. You might get a tour guide who's had an off day, and that's one of maybe 10,000 students that go to that school. It's not necessarily going to be a complete, indication of what your experiences are going to be like with the people there. The same thing goes when you try to get a little bit deeper in academics. People often think, maybe I should shadow a student. Maybe I should go to a class. I don't technically believe in going to class. I think that that's just forcing a student to do something they don't necessarily want to do. And I don't think you get much out of that experience to begin with. You have no idea what's being taught in that class that day. It could be an exam review. What's more important in that aspect is go talk to the professors, see how they like to teach, see how excited they are about the area of academics that you're most interested in. And if you're looking at schools that you're really interested in and you're not able to talk to professors in any way, shape, or form, that's something that tells you that maybe the professors there aren't as accessible as they might need to be for what you're looking for. There's a variety of different things that can pop in your head through these experiences. One thing that colleges are helping to do in terms of giving you opportunities to dig deep is special events these days. They're just becoming a bigger and bigger thing. Spring of your senior year, admitted student events are happening on every campus across the country. They're usually big, they're usually, exciting, and they usually provide a lot of opportunities for wide breadth of exploration. Go talk to resources, academics, go see dorms, go eat in the dining halls. That's a really good way to just kind of get a full taste of what that experience might be like over the next 4 years. Other events that you might want to be looking out for too. Scholarships were mentioned earlier, of course. That is never a bad thing. And there are scholarship visits offered on campuses all across the country. They are not necessarily widely advertised because in a lot of ways, they're meant for a specific type of student. So that doesn't mean that you can't call there and say, hey, do you have any visits that are related to scholarship opportunities? They will absolutely tell you what's available and how to become a part of that. Now, typically those are time sensitive. So you want to get a sense of what those might be if it's a school you're really interested in. We have one where we cover travel costs for students all across the country to come for a 24-hour period. And if they end up going to school there after that visit, they get an additional scholarship that comes with them. So there's ones that will come with fee waivers as well, all of which can help you not only get a good sense of what the school is like, but also have a financial benefit to it as well. That can just drive a lot of opportunities where you have situations where you can dig deeper into schools that might be on the exterior of your radar, but looking for those opportunities that usually happen somewhere in the range of your late junior year, early senior year is when you're really going to see those pop up. And then, of course, the spring of your senior year is when you get those admitted student events, and they put you in a really good position to kind of dig deeper. My last thing about kind of college visits as a whole is goes back to the two earlier topics that we talked about when it comes to holistic review and the admission process in general. Look, demonstrated interest is a thing. It's a thing. It's not something that a lot of schools will tell you is a part of their overall admission process. It might not be in terms of making an admission decision, but I promise you, the more you interact with a school on an official basis, there's a modeling system that they work with that tells you how likely that student is to come to your school. Now, in that situation, the more you've interacted with them on an official basis, the more they want to, obviously, if you're a student that they want to accept, they're also a student that they want you to attend. We talked earlier about Washington, obviously having 31,000 applications for 1,800 seats. There are a lot of mathematics and statistics that go into filling those 800 seats. And part of that is this modeling of demonstrated interest. It doesn't necessarily mean you got to send them 8,000 emails and go to every event that they have, but every little bit counts. There is a lot to obviously just stepping on a college campus kind of incognito and checking things out, see if it's the type of vibe you like. But if it is, and you start to get serious about that school, go on official visits. They really give you a sense of what the overall personality of the school is. The presentations are typically branded for a reason. They're trying to tell you what are the greatest hits of this school. The tours are going to reflect the personality of the school. Usually these days, a lot of schools are going on strictly story-based tours. Why? Because the tour is a chance for you to interact with a student and really get the sense of what student life is like there. We don't pay them to know information about the admission process. We don't have them study a book that's this thick so that they know every detail about every building that you pass by. They know their stories, they know their experiences, they know what it's like to be a student there. That's the most important aspect of that college tour. But at the end of the day, having your name in that list of attended a campus visit, it can help through the admission process. It's just one little extra thing that might, push you over the edge to certain opportunities at that school that you might be interested in. So again, I live in the Wyoming community, and I'm happy to help in any way possible, especially with visits to Miami, because that's what I do. But anytime anybody wants to pick my brain about this, I'll meet you down at YCoco, and I could talk about this for hours. So
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Jesse, you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And so nice to have a fellow Denison alum on the call. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Jessie Yeager. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Admission at Denison. We're up in Granville, which is probably 2.5 hours from Wyoming. We are a 4-year residential liberal arts college, about 2,300 students. We are 80% out of state. So if you're like me, I grew up in Cincinnati and I found my way to Granville, and I was super pleasantly surprised that it looks like New England. The kids are from all over the country. We're about 80% out of state, like I mentioned. So that's a small bit about us to kind of get started. I have the good fortune of talking about scholarships and financial aid, which I think I often feel the stress kind of rise in the room when we broach the topic of finance and affordability. I will do my best to explain from my vantage point. I should say my perspective is from the selective small liberal arts college. And I've had the really good fortune of working at Denison for a while, but that's also my only vantage point into the process. So I welcome colleagues to kind of jump in with their insights. But in the big picture, there's 2 ways to get money for college: merit aid and need-based aid. And these are kind of 2 different avenues you can think of when you think about how you might pay for college, like what kind of money might you get to assist you. So merit aid, that is the idea that comes from this root word of merit, something that's deserved or earned. So this idea that you are getting, sometimes used interchangeably, scholarship, some kind of money you do not have to pay back, that you get for free from the college or university to which you've been admitted. So in our case, we give merit awards to students at a whole range of levels from $5,000 up to $30,000, usually based on the strength of the student's application, sometimes based on how much we like that student to come. Every college does merit aid differently based on their own funding model and how much they would like to discount the student. In our case, you don't have to do anything extra to be eligible for merit aid. No extra essay, no extra application. That's going to be different at every college. So one of the things you're, making a spreadsheet of questions that you've asked is to ask, do you have a separate application for scholarships? And if so, what is that like? Maybe it's just an extra essay, or maybe it's an entirely additional application. And then you can decide, do I want to write that essay or not? What is this worth to me to do this? In our case, again, no extra app for a scholarship at Denison. Another way you might learn about merit aid is through the website of the college you're looking at. Some colleges have what I kind of call a plug and chug chart, where they're like, hey, if you tell us your GPA and your test score, then we can plot for you, or you can do it yourself, your chances of admission and your chance of merit aid. So some colleges might forecast, hey, if you've got this ACT and this high school GPA, weighted or unweighted, here's what you're looking at in terms of merit aid. Not every school has that. If you don't see it on the website, it's likely because they don't have that system, but that may give you some sense of what's ahead of you, what ahead for you at a school that you're quite interested in. Other times, if you don't see that kind of chart, you're going to find out the merit aid you've won most likely at the point of admission. So you'll get your admission decision letter sometime your senior year from the college. And if they haven't already shared what your merit aid would be, at that point, you'll receive notification about what scholarship or merit aid you've won. So again, merit aid, free money, you don't have to pay back, and you get it because of the strength of your application or the merit that you're bringing to the table. So the other side of financial aid, is, simply speaking, is need-based aid. And need-based aid is determined based on a family's ability to contribute to paying for college. So I think often when we hear about someone got money for school, they might have gotten merit aid and need-based aid, or just one. With need-based aid, the main way you're going to receive this is by filling out a form called the FAFSA, which is the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. You'll hear this term a lot. It is free to fill out. It's administered by the federal government, and every college uses it to determine what kind of financial assistance your family can expect when paying for college. That form doesn't open, it's usually in October. And so you're not behind, you can't fill it out now. You have to wait actually until the calendar year that you will be heading into college to fill it out. Some colleges will have you fill it out every year if you would like to receive need-based aid, others just once. Need-based aid is entirely optional. So some families will say, I don't think we're gonna qualify for need-based aid. And what they mean is, likely our family income is above the threshold for which we will get assistance from the government, from the state. And that may be the case. It also may not be the case. And so I recommend that students apply for need-based aid, even if you don't think you're going to qualify. The worst that happens is that you get what you thought was going to happen, which is nothing. But if you do apply, and you stay in state, at least in Ohio, there are some grants that you'll be eligible for simply by being an Ohio student who stays at an Ohio college that you won't be eligible for unless you file the FAFSA, unless you're in that need-based aid group. So the FAFSA is the main form you're going to hear about in terms of need-based aid. There is an additional form that some schools like Denison and maybe others on this call use called the CSS profile. It is another lovely form that we would ask you to fill out. It is run by the folks at the College Board. And again, this is something that you're doing senior year, not in the lead up to it. But the CSS profile allows schools to allocate even more additional financial aid to students and get a sense for their entire financial picture, not just perhaps income, which can sometimes be limiting in the scope. Another kind of term to look for, or a word that we use a lot at Denison, is that we meet 100% of demonstrated financial need. This is, if financial aid is especially important to you, this might be a phrase to look for. This is a very precise wording that colleges will use. A college that meets 100% of demonstrated financial need means that they look at the results of the FAFSA how much money the form says your family can contribute, and they'll meet the gap 100% to the cost of tuition, so that there's not a gap. We meet 100% of the gap between what your family can afford based on the FAFSA and the cost of the university. Not every school meets 100% demonstrated need. Some meet it for some students and not others, but that would be a phrase to look for on a website if this is particularly important to you. Other just like general thoughts about need-based aid, I would say I am sometimes wary of students, and I'm sure in the high school counseling world, students talk a lot about getting a full ride. And I always really want to ask what students mean by that, because I think often full ride can kind of connote anything from I'm getting some housing covered and I'm paying less than I might in some ways, to I don't have any expenses. So full ride is not a term you're going to hear admissions people using because it's ambiguous and really kind of misleading. But generally, students might get all of their tuition covered. The other expense then is housing and meals if it's a residential campus. So if someone is saying they got a full ride, that could mean a number of things. Hopefully it means full tuition is covered. Maybe it means housing and meals is also covered. So I would encourage you to dig deeper when you hear kind of chatter of that and ask your counselor like what that might look like at a certain school. The other thing to think about is just that the cost of going to college seems exorbitant, and absolutely it is a huge investment. The price that is listed on the brochure is the price, and it is also not the price because of the merit aid that I mentioned and the need-based aid that I mentioned. It's not incredibly rare, but it is not common for students to pay the full price printed on the brochure. So there's usually some form of discount given via merit aid, need-based aid, or a combination of both. It is challenging that you're not probably going to have that full picture when you apply. And so what I recommend to students is talk about finances as a family, like have that discussion of, do I need to look at schools that offer merit aid? Is that not a consideration? But also know that you don't want to sell yourself short in terms of cost relative to what you might get in aid. You will not know, fortunately or unfortunately, how much discount you'll receive until the point of admission most of the time. So my advice is to apply liberally. Obviously lean into the counseling staff at your high school who can share with you what past Wyoming students have seen in their package and maybe kind of help you shop a little bit about what kind of consumer mindset you might have as you look at a certain school. Private schools especially are notorious for having super high prices, and in a lot of cases we offer a larger discount relative to the price because of the funding we have, and not being a state-run institution, we can use our funds in a certain way that other places can, or we have more discretion. So lots to think about. The Wyoming College Counseling Office is a great resource for you. And of course, in the Q&A, I welcome colleagues to chime in on how your school might do it if it's a bit different.
That's great. Thank you, Jessie. I think I need to put on a poster. That's the price, but it's not the price. And like no truer words have ever been uttered in a panel that we've had. I love these events because I always learn something from my colleagues. And so I just so appreciate you guys taking the time to be with us tonight. We do have one question in the chat that we're going to ask, but I have some follow-up questions that I would like to run by you guys. The first thing I want to say is I just want to add on to what Jessie said. In addition to the money that comes from the federal government or the state government or schools themselves, there are also something called third-party scholarships. On Canvas, which is our in-house platform, our students are familiar with Canvas. I hope our parents are familiar with Canvas. We keep a running list of scholarships that follow the student wherever they go. So we encourage our students to really get in the habit of checking into Canvas every couple of weeks to see if we've added any new scholarships. So I have a question about, it's kind of tagging on what Andrew said about demonstrated interest. And one of the things I think is interesting about the college application process now is that it's easy for students to apply to a lot of schools at one time. Therefore, it makes it harder for the colleges to determine who is a serious interested applicant versus somebody who just added another school to the Common App the day before it was due. So there's kind of this urban myth out there that it doesn't really matter. I think it does matter. And I want, if you guys could talk a little bit about not only the campus visit piece, but also just engagement with opening emails that you're receiving from the colleges. And if they're having an online event, or they're in the area, or they come to your high school, like how those things matter too. So whoever wants to take that.
I think I'll just say briefly, the best way I can say is that I work in the Office of Mission, but I work in the Division of Enrollment Management. And so we are trying to manage the enrollment of the class. And part of that goes to Andrew's point of trying to figure out, if we admit you, how likely are you to come? And so then demonstrated interest helps us with that piece. And I'll kick it to others, but that perspective, I think, helps with the whole selective admission part. Like we're trying to manage enrollment, not just admit the most qualified people.
I guess I'll jump in with a different perspective. We at Washington University in St. Louis actually no longer track demonstrated interest. So it's not going to play any role in an admission decision for you per se, but we love interacting with students. I spent all day interacting with students on our campus today, and I love it. So if you have questions, reach out to us, but certainly don't become pen pals with admissions solely because you feel it will improve your chances of admission. We want our process to be as equitable as we can, and we recognize that not everyone can go to every single college everywhere. So I appreciate you being here tonight. Anyone that watches this recording too, it's great. I hope you learned something, but know that you don't need to visit our campus, and we're not going to track demonstrated interest as part of our process. That does make our process of enrolling students much more difficult because we actually don't know a lot of the information that could help us know where we're going to land with our enrollment. So there's a lot of unknowns, but what you'll find is that schools like us may then seek to under-enroll our class so that we can fill on the back end from our wait list. So if you apply to highly selective schools and you're waitlisted, know that there are processes in place to help fill those seats. And that's something that we do at Washington University, is just to make sure that we don't over-enroll our class.
Great.
And I would just kind of be somewhere in the middle. So we are using demonstrated interest sometimes in the process. It is not as prevalent as it has been kind of pandemic prior. But I would say that, you know, as you're doing your college search, the ways that you can connect have changed a lot. So you can do virtual programming, you know, you can kind of pick and choose the different topics. You know, we're offering so many different things for you to select and to learn about, but we don't expect that you will attend every single one of those. So as you're kind of tailoring your search that's unique to you, think about those activities. So maybe you want to do some virtual, virtual events before you make a visit to campus, and you can learn a little bit about that. Or, you know, maybe we're coming to your part of the world, and so, you know, you attend something locally in your community to hear from someone from the admission office, or maybe we have some current students or alumni. So there are ways that you can connect as you're doing your search and then stepping on that campus. But I'm with Andrew. I think that visit and that fit and that feel is something that you really have to experience when you step on a college campus. And I'm a firm believer in that little voice, that gut feeling that you get that says, you know, I think this would be a good place. I could see myself living and learning here, or it just doesn't connect, and that's okay. We're not offended by that because we know that this is a process of exploration. So, you know, take advantage of the different resources you have, but know that, you know, you're going to have everything from, you know, schools that can track every single solitary time that you open an email, you click on a link in an email, to, you know, schools like Washington University that it doesn't play a role at all. And I think you're going to find that there's sort of this graduated scale in between there where, you know, it's hard for you to know, but you need to do the most well thought out search process and visit process that works for you all as individuals and as a family.
Perfect. I think the moral of the story is don't act like a crazy person, but also act somewhat like you maybe would want to spend 4 years of your life there. We have a question from the Q&A, and actually, Andrew, I'm going to let you take this one since you mentioned it. It is about elaborate a little bit on scholarship visits or scholarship programs. Like,
Yeah.
how does that work?
Yeah, there's a variety of them, and they pop up as part of the prospective student search prior to application, and then they pop up sometimes as accepted students. A lot of them are selective; you need to apply. Some of them are highly selective, and they're part of a high level honors type of thing where I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples of the two that we do. One is for prospective students in the fall of your senior year. It's called Bridges. It's based off of trying to bring in students who have an appreciation for or commitment to building diversity on our campus and a more inclusive environment. That's anything. That could be anybody. It's meant to bring in leaders who really want to make it a place where everybody has a voice and everybody has a place. But at the same time, it's totally at no cost to the student. It clears them of any app fee that they might have, and then it provides an additional scholarship on top of a great 24 hours on campus of getting to know professors, current students, and the environment as a whole. The one that's a little bit more selective that you might find is, something like a scholarship showcase. A lot of schools have this where they'll invite some of their best accepted students to come to campus and sort of compete for scholarship opportunities. I love when people ask me, like, what's the competition? I'm like, cage match followed by broom ball. No, it's essentially, sets of interviews and maybe small group workshops. They're just trying to identify not only if you're the right fit for their school and their potential high level programs, but also providing an opportunity for you to see if that's a good fit for you. Taking ownership of this process and really being selfish about it is not a bad thing. Understanding what's going to be the best fit for you, you're the only one that can do that better than anybody else, So, like I said, these scholarship visits tend to have a little bit of a variety of basis behind them. I mean, literally, there are some that do prospective student scholarship visits. Now, granted, it might not be a lot, some that do it there where it's like anybody who comes is going to get an additional $1,000 off of tuition, or they'll say $1,000 scholarship. That's really just $1,000 reduction in tuition, but why not? It's a way to learn about the institution. If you decide you like it, boom, there's $1,000 off on top of anything else you might earn from your merit or potential need-based aid. So take advantage of those. Like I said, they're not always widely advertised. Because, like, for instance, with the Bridges Scholarship, we don't want that to be a place for really, I guess, on top of it, students who are just searching for scholarship opportunities alone to kind of build up those spots. We really want it to have that true sense of what it's meant to be, not just for students who represent diversity, but for students who appreciate it. And part of that selection process is an essay that proves, that tries to show a student's kind of views on that. So, regardless of whether or not you're a fit for one or another, keep looking out for those. Pick up the phone, call the admission office at a school you might be interested in, and just ask simply, do you have any scholarship-based visits? And they will tell you. They'll tell you if they have them. Some cases, there might be summer programs that you can go to that are on that college campus that might provide an additional scholarship or at least an app fee. Either way, you're finding a financial benefit on top of also visiting those schools.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think we have one more question. It's actually a two-parter. It's about essays. The first part is, what are you guys looking for in a Common App essay? The second part is, with Chat GPT, artificial intelligence, are you guys thinking about that, making plans for that? What's the status of that and the admissions process? And you guys can, I'm sure you all have things to say, so have at it.
Well, I can start. I'll say that with the Common App, there is no one prompt I care to read more than any other prompt. I find what I'm really looking for is to see, can you do college level writing? Not, are you already a college level writer because you're in high school, but can I see you writing at the college level in the near future? And so I'm looking for, things like tone and grammar and context, and can you synthesize? So the great news is you can write about anything, because I'm looking to see how you write and not what you write about. I often think the more vanilla topics write better, because you are forced to rely on a well-written essay as opposed to a flashy story. My personal favorite topic, though, to write about or to read about is your part-time job. Writing about your part-time job implies so many good qualities, like the fact that you have a part-time job and you make money and you're independent and you're, just like on your way to being an adult. And there's always characters at your workplace you can write about. I think it is usually lends itself to a good essay, but there are certainly topics I would recommend not writing about, but there isn't one prompt, because one of the prompts is choose your own. And so I honestly very rarely look to see what prompt you are even writing about, because they all are applicable. But how you write it, I certainly am looking at that.
So Jessie, do you guys talk about artificial intelligence yet and how that's?
No, not yet. I think we always view the essay with a little bit of skepticism, because if it's already highly edited for many students, it's already a sample of your writing, but maybe not one of many indicators of your abilities. So no, not yet. I mean, it's definitely a part of our process, but I feel there's a disproportionate amount of emphasis put on the essay for where it falls in terms of what we use. The transcript is the most important thing to us. So no, I'll be curious too, to kind of see where it evolves.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that?
So the only other thing I would say is, along with kind of choosing a topic that you feel comfortable writing about, is one of the things we're looking for is to hear it in the student's voice. And we can tell the difference in a student who's writing and someone who's had a little bit more time to write and polish, and it's a different voice. So we want to hear it in the student's voice. We want to hear what you have to say, how you write. It helps us learn more about you. And I think that a lot of times there's a misconception that students will say, I don't have anything to write about. And yes, you do, whether it's a part-time job or it's some kind of opportunity that you've had, or an experience that you're extraordinarily proud of, or something that you've worked hard, a challenge you've worked hard to overcome, or just like, your favorite thing that you like to do. It just kind of helps us learn a little bit more about you. So, don't feel like you really have to dig super deep and say, I don't have anything that's unique or special, because you do. And kind of have those conversations. I think it's also important to, have somebody else take a look at it, but they're offering you some advice. They're not writing it for you. They're not tweaking it. They're not, doing that, but, just kind of have another set of eyes to give you a little bit of feedback. And I think the other piece of advice that we are looking at is not only how do you write, but things like spelling and grammar and, the way that you're using things. And spell check is a terrific tool, and it will tell you if you have spelled a word incorrectly, but it won't tell you if you've used the wrong word. So, which to, or two did you mean to put into that essay? So, somebody else kind of taking a look at those. I think the other thing that I always tell students is write your essay and then put it away and come back to it, because the more you look at it, the easier it's going to be for you to miss something just because you've looked at it so many times. But as silly as it sounds, print it and read it out loud, but read it exactly how you wrote it. And so then as you start reading, as you start verbalizing it, you're going to say, oh gosh, I forgot a word there, or that didn't sound right, or I just used the same word in the same sentence 3 times and I didn't mean to do that. So, it's not something that you can sit down the night before your application is due and write. You can, but it's not going to be the best representation of your writing. So it's something that, you should spend a little bit of time doing. And then, it will be representative and reflective of who you are and the story that you want to share with the admission office.
Thank you.
That's this is my favorite topic to talk about. So I want to follow up on Rayanne because her final sentiment was perfect. It has to be your voice. If you're letting AI write your college essay, you are only cheating yourself. We need to know about you. Not a lot of schools interview anymore. Here's your chance. And yeah, you don't have to have some widely crazy story about your life, some kind of incredible situation that happened to you. I'll give you an example. My favorite essay that I've ever read, and I read about 1,000 every single year, was about a kid whose parents gave her the nickname the first waffle. If you don't know, I'll make it quick. She was the first of 5 kids. The first waffle, you always mess with it. You open it up too early. It never comes out right because you're overthinking it. And she talked about how she hated that nickname as a kid. And she really felt like they were kind of singling her out. But then she grew to really appreciate it and felt like it was a badge of honor that she had to lead the way for her younger siblings. It showed so much maturity, but it was also just a look inside this student and who she was and where her head was at. That's all I need to know. And you can do that through a variety of different ways. Yes, use spell check. Yes, make sure you're not using run-on sentences and commas in the wrong place, of course. But, your English teacher can help you with that. This really needs to be an insight into who you are as a person. 2 last bits of advice. Number 1 is, if you're thinking of something interesting, I don't know if anybody watches Jeopardy out there. I'm sure you have a grandpa who does or something like that. They always ask that, these strange little anecdotes in one break. What would be yours? What would be that one little thing you'd want somebody to ask you about if you were on TV for a day? What's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to you that's an interesting story? There you go. You got the start of an essay right there. My second bit of advice is please don't write an essay about an ACL tear. I honestly don't know how high schoolers are walking these days. They should all be on crutches with the amount of ACL tear injuries that I read about in essays every single year. So as much as that might have been a hard experience for you, I promise you are not the only one that's torn your ACL, because I read about them all the time. So find something else unique, something little to kind of put yourself outside of the pack there.
Strong ditto on that.
Danielle, anything for us?
I think there's some bad timing here because Chat GPT was on an agenda. It was an agenda item in a meeting yesterday that we have pushed to next week. So I don't have the response there, but curious where that finds us next year. I would really echo what everyone's already said. I think the important thing that I would add is just think about the why when you're writing something. If you're telling a story, why is this story meaningful to you? If you're talking about an experience that might already be on your resume or might be included in something like an extracurricular activity on your application, why does it matter? Why are you choosing to write about this? And as you're writing, just constantly ask yourself why. It'll make it a more introspective and truly personal statement in a way. And I would really encourage you to just continue asking those questions throughout your writing process.
That's great. And I think that's the perfect place to end it, which is really to think about, what you want out of your college experience, why you're going to college in the first place. And if you keep those things, running through your mind throughout this process, I think it's going to be a very successful process. So thank you so much, both families who've joined us on this beautiful spring evening, our panelists who've given up their Thursday evening to be with us. We really appreciate you, and we look forward to working with you next year.